What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here, PackersNews.com. Once again, double dip on a Tuesday evening with the news that the Packers are signing former Jets defensive end Muhammad Wilkerson to a one-year deal. Our Tom Silverstein just reported a little bit ago. Most notably, a one-year deal, which undoubtedly means they will be getting a very motivated player. Wilkerson clearly had his issues down the stretch there with the Jets, being suspended towards the end of his tenure, putting some really suspect effort on film. But with a one-year deal, you have to think if he's as motivated as he should be to prove to everyone that he is the player he once used to be prior to getting paid big time by the Jets, the Packers could be cooking with gas there up front with a down lineman trio of Mike Daniels, Kenny Clark, and Muhammad Wilkerson. As Tom put out there on Twitter a little while ago, Wilkerson always liked the Packers first and foremost. He obviously took the other visits with New Orleans and Washington, etc. Needed to gauge the market, but ultimately decided he wanted to be in Green Bay with Mike Pettin, the man who really championed him coming out of the draft all those years ago. If you read the book Collision Low Crossers, you'll see Pettin's great affinity for him. So obviously that on top of the news earlier in the day that the Packers are signing Jimmy Graham, the tight end, formerly of the Seattle Seahawks, and releasing Jordy Nelson. As I said at that time, I thought I'd jump back on. If any other news happened to come across my Twitter feed, and obviously it has, so thought I'd jump on and see what everyone's thinking, see what everyone's talking about here. A lot more thumbs up emojis tonight, I'm noticing. A lot more than the angry emojis I was getting earlier, so that's good. Mike starts us off with, when are they going to cut Perry? They're not going to cut Perry. They just signed him to a deal last summer. Obviously, the injuries were an issue last year, as they have been all throughout his career, but it's still comparative to other pass rushers around the league, not a crazy contract. What are we going to do about our secondary? Great question, Jeremy. I tend to think they'll wait for the first wave of free agency to die down. Brian Gutekunst, just about an hour ago, had a press conference about the Jordy Nelson release. He was asked about free agency. Clearly, they're going to be in on some of these mid to low level guys. They were never going to be in play for the Aaron Colvins, the Trumaine Johnsons. Trumaine Johnson, I know his name had been linked to Green Bay by a couple of different reports, but he signed with the Jets today for $15 million per. That was never going to happen in Green Bay. And I've been saying to you guys, anybody who's been here day in and day out during my Facebook chats knows, they were never going to be bidding for any of these top flight guys in the first 24 hours of free agency. It's just too cost prohibitive, especially with these teams out there with 30, 40, 50, even 60, 70 million dollars worth of cap space. The Packers hovering around 20 million. They need to be selective. They've obviously done that with a one-year signing of Mo Wilkerson and the signing of Jimmy Graham. What is even happening, Megan? That is a great question. This is called free agency, and this is called your team is active in it within the first 24 hours, which is, I know, rarefied air for Packers fans. Can we stop complaining about every move? Shane, that's a phenomenal idea. I wholeheartedly endorse it. I thought Nagler was never right. Steve, more often than not, Nagler's never right. Just didn't kind of roll off the tongue when I was naming the podcast, so, you know. Thoughts on Nelson getting released? As you indicate there, I think it clearly makes business sense. His cap hit did not match what was put on film last year, and I know the argument for keeping him was the productivity we all saw while Rodgers was still under center. However, most of that was in the red zone, and most of that was Aaron Rodgers looking for him. It was not a lot of play designed to go to Jordy. A lot of it was Aaron manipulating things at the line of scrimmage for Jordy to get open. And I'm not saying that Jordy didn't work. I'm not saying that Jordy didn't, do the job in front of him. Obviously he did. But there's no question that as the year went on, you saw Father Time knocking on the door. You saw the lack of suddenness as an athlete, especially on some of the stuff where he was asked to work from the slot and to do any of the horizontal work that's asked of, say, Randall Cobb or Ty Montgomery. Once you have those flare-outs into the flat, his inability to create any kind of yards after the catch pretty much was your first clue that there was a good chance they could move on. One note I think, rather telling, I would say, from Gutekunst's press conference was when he was asked if he had spoken to Aaron Rodgers about it, and he indicated that he had spoken to Aaron after the decision was made, but he did not clear it with Aaron. He did not run it by Aaron, and I think that's the right move. That is his job as the GM, to look out for the team as a whole. Aaron Rodgers is not LeBron. He's not out there calling the shots, designing the team. That is not his gig. That is Brian's job 100%. And I've gotten a lot of comments about that on Twitter. I understand the thinking. I understand the impetus to say, well, Aaron might be upset. It ain't Aaron's job. It ain't Aaron's gig. And that's as simple as I can put it. I think the Packers consider a perimeter receiver in free agency, possibly prior. That's, Alex, I keep getting asked about him. I think he's got all the physical tools. Obviously, he's still pretty raw as a receiver. He's been up and down so far since the switch to that position. I'd be surprised if they went and spent a lot of money. If he's sitting out there, say, a week from now, maybe. But I'd be surprised if they jumped in right away in free agency. Do you think Adams will be as good as Nelson? That's a really good question. I think he'll be his own man, his own receiver. I think he'll be different. I don't think he's going to be the deep threat that Jordy was at the height of his powers. But I do think he is going to be very good and very productive for the Packers. What's up with a good cornerback? Matthew, that's a very good question. I understand the trepidation around Packers fans while they see all of these top-flight cornerbacks go off in free agency. But as I said earlier this afternoon and a little bit earlier in this video, the Packers were never going to be in on Tremaine Johnson at $15 million or Aaron Colvin at what he got paid. I mean, they just don't have the room. They don't have the cap space. And there are still a ton of very good, or let's say serviceable corners out there in free agency. Prince of Mukamara, Melvin from Indianapolis. There are guys out there that they can bring in and who would instantly upgrade what they have. Now, are they going to be able to go out and get Dion in his prime? Of course not. But there is still plenty of opportunity out there. There's still plenty of cornerbacks available in free agency. Trading is available. The draft is obviously going to happen. A long way to go between now and kickoff of week 1. On a scale of 0 to 10, what are the chances we bring back Jordy? I would say, after looking at the release and the statement that was in it from the Packers and Brian Gutekunst, and then watching Brian Gutekunst at the podium, I would say from a 0 to 10, I'd give it a 1.5. I tend to think they are moving on. The D-line is going to be solid. Can we please get an edge rusher? I'm sure they are looking. It is pretty shallow out there as far as the talent pool when it comes to edge rushing in free agency. You got to think they're looking at the draft to try and upgrade there. Now, will that necessarily automatically mean they'll have to take an edge rusher in the first round? Not necessarily, but you've got to think, yes, they are, without a doubt, looking at finding someone, anyone, who can win a one-on-one on the outside. The Packers trade down in the draft now that we have Wilkerson or a cornerback. I tend to think they'll select who the best defensive player they see or they have graded at 14. With so many, now, especially now that Buffalo's jumped up into the top 10 and looking to get into the top 5, you have to think at least 3, probably 4 quarterbacks, maybe even 5, are going to go in the top 10. That's going to push a top 5 defensive talent down to them at 14. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's just a question of who they have graded the highest on their board. That could be Josh Jackson. That could be Harold Landry. That could be Derwin James if he makes it that far. I mean, I can't say, obviously, I don't know. I'm not privy to their draft work or their board, but I don't think there's any doubt they're going to get a very good defensive player at 14. And I would be surprised if they traded down out of that, unless the talent that happens to fall to them, say, is equally, like they have graded basically equally, and then they could drop back a little bit and maybe, gain a few picks. But with 12 picks already in the hopper, I'd be surprised if that was the way they chose to go. Is that why we cut Jordy for Moore and Jimmy? For Mo and Jimmy, I think is what you mean. I would tend to think it's much more about Jimmy Graham than it is about Mo Wilkerson. Wilkerson on a one-year deal. I don't have the numbers yet. Actually, I'm getting texted. Maybe I do have the numbers. Nope, it's not the numbers. But even without the numbers, I would tend to think Wilkerson is going to be manageable. I do think Jimmy Graham, we still don't have the numbers on that deal yet either. You got to think that's going to be the issue as far as the cap goes. So I would tend to think cutting Jordy was much more about going and getting Jimmy Graham. That's funny, Jason. Derwin James at 14 makes a lot of sense considering today's happenings. Yeah, I would say even before today's happenings. Once they traded Demarius Randall, I think Derwin James made a ton of sense, especially when you put together the fact that he said at the Combine that the Packers had talked to him about his versatility and specifically his ability in the slot, which is where Randall was playing a lot of the time down the stretch last year. Derwin James would solve a lot of problems for the Packers. Unfortunately, it wouldn't solve all of them, including perimeter corner opposite Kevin King, which is something you have to think they're going to look at in free agency, which officially starts tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. Do we still try to extend Rodgers? Zero doubt. That is going to happen, especially now that Drew Brees and Kirk Cousins are signed. Matt Ryan is really the only other quarterback out there with you have to think of kind of a pending deal. He has 1 year left on his deal. Rodgers has 2. Got to think with those other 2 guys signed, you have a bit of a parameter to work with. Russ Ball and Rodgers people will undoubtedly be talking. Will they do it sooner rather than later? I'm sure the Packers hope so, because that undoubtedly they would like to sign Rodgers to an extension, get that cap hit under control. Right now, it's slated to be around $22 million for 2018. Got to think they're trying to reduce that, obviously, and an extension would go a long way. Does Mo coming to the Pack means Matthews is gone? I doubt it, but you never know. I sure didn't think they were going to cut Jordy Nelson. I thought they would restructure him when I woke up this morning. So I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, it's impossible. I would tend to doubt they're about to move on from Clay Matthews, who, despite his low sack numbers, is still one of their better defensive players. How about E.J. Gaines or Rashawn Melvin at cornerback? David, I think both of those names make a lot of sense. Melvin especially, I think, could probably be gotten for I'm not going to say below market deal, but a team-friendly deal. A deal that makes sense within their cap structure. I think Melvin was playing very, very well before that hand injury. He's the kind of guy that they undoubtedly are looking at, and the Packers fans, frankly, should be expecting. Gaines, Melvin, possibly Prince Amukamara. A guy along those lines who's not a premier guy, is not going to come in and make $10, $15, $20 million a year, but is going to be, competent and be able to play on the edge and give the Packers what they need. What is Rashawn Melvin expected to earn in free agency? Steve, that's a great question. I really can't say with any kind of certainty since, he's coming off an injury. He really did not look very good prior to this year. He balled out in his contract year, which always kind of concerns you. But yeah, coming off that injury, finished the year on injured reserve. Hard to say. Where do you think Nelson will land? I got to say, I'll be surprised if he doesn't end up in Baltimore. They have been starving for wide receivers for the last 2 or 3 years. They've got a big, strong-arm quarterback in Flacco, who obviously is not what he was during their Super Bowl run, but he's a guy who can get him the football on the perimeter and do anything get it anywhere he ends up on the field. I think Baltimore makes a lot of sense. Colvin is gone, going to Houston, correct. What about Morris Claiborne now that Johnson is signed to the Jets? I think Mo Claiborne makes a lot of sense. He throw his name in there as well. So just talking a little bit ago about Melvin or Gaines, I think, or Amukamara. I think Claiborne is another one of those guys who, second, third tier free agency. You're not going to break the bank for him. He's going to come in. He's going to play. He's going to give you solid minutes. He's going to be, most importantly, an upgrade from Devon House. I think that's what they need. All right, guys, I'm going to take one or two more. Is it time to look for a replacement for Crosby? He's got a high salary. I tend to doubt it. I know his name was floated, I can't remember where it was exactly, as a possible cap casualty earlier this offseason. I'd be very surprised if they went that way. Now, that doesn't mean they won't, but, you saw Gano just get the extension. Yes, he's on obviously on the high end when it comes to kickers around the league, but I tell you what, he's worth the price just for the peace of mind. I mean, more often than not, he's going to make that kick that you need him to make. Whereas, the Packers have gone through long stretches of trying to find, a punter and or a kicker before, and those times can stretch out much longer than you expect them to because you can't find the guy. Which is weird when you think, you need 32 humans on this planet to be able to kick a football, and you can't find, 20 of them that can do it consistently well. So I tend to think they will leave Crosby alone. Hard to find kickers who can kick well in December and January in Green Bay. Another fantastic point. Packers defense will definitely stop the run this season. You got that right, Matthew. Those three hosses up front, there's little doubt about that. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. They do fly by very quickly. Make sure you're checking PackersNews.com for all the latest. We'll have it for you. Anything and everything having to do with the Packers and all their moves. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great night.